Hi, everyone. Welcome to Circling the Bases. My name is Chris Crawford. Hope everyone is enjoying their week. We've got a very special episode for you guys, and special episodes require special guests. Together, they form the Breakfast All Day podcast. Please welcome Christy, Lemire, and Alonso Duralde. Thank you guys so much for joining us. How are we doing today?
So good to see you.
Great. Thanks for having us.
Oh, you're very welcome. So, normally you guys are listening to me nerd out and talk about fantasy baseball and fantasy baseball prospects. But those of you who follow me on Twitter, and I can only offer an apology, know that I am a big movie fan. And I have been a fan of these guys for a very long time. I was telling him before we started recording, this is like one of the first times I've truly been nervous because I found you guys. I watched a movie called Pixels, and it was so bad that I was like, I have to see what other people are saying about this movie. I have to. And your guys' video was the first one I found, and you made a lifelong fan. That terrible movie brought us all together.
I hope we provided some much needed insight and clarity in this very complicated Adam Sandler movie.
Yeah, that was, they say, you know what? I wanted to ask you guys this question because it's something I've debated with friends before, and I think I know what you guys will say, but I'll ask you both. Is it possible for a movie to be objectively good or bad?
Go.
That's this is a theory of art question that we're getting into here on a baseball podcast, which I am like the least qualified person to ever appear on sports anything. Like bringing it back to Adam Sandler, Christy just had to like footnote all of Hustle for me and tell me who the NBA players were. So please, listeners, know that I don't belong here, and I apologize for crashing your turf. No, I don't. I think that I don't believe in objectivity of criticism. I think that everything comes down to standards and context and personal preferences and all that other stuff. So no, I don't think there's such a thing as something that is objectively good or objectively bad. But I think that it is the job of the critic to explain why they think something is or isn't good.
Sure.
Christy? I just had this very similar conversation with my 12-year-old son just last night because he was watching some show where somebody used that phrase objectively bad. And he was like, what does that mean? So I explained to him, like, when you're looking at a movie or watching a TV show or looking at a piece of art or listening to a piece of music, like you bring yourself to it and you bring your experiences and you bring your particular tastes and your perspective and your comparative abilities. And so, I think there are probably very, very few things or people or artists that we can all say are objectively good, like Dolly Parton, for example. I think we can all agree on, right? Right, but there are even something like Casablanca or like Citizen Kane, like movies that are considered the greatest ever. Someone's going to go, I hate the use of shadow or whatever it is. So it's really, really tough to say. And that's part of what makes this fun is that there are things that we love and we feel passionately about. And then we'll meet somebody who has a totally different take. And it's not a matter of I'm convincing you or you're convincing me, but a matter of having that conversation and how we're both better for it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I would say if you guys are definitely the experts in this field, but I would say I think it's easier to maybe qualify something as objectively bad because of, if something involves homophobia or xenophobia or something like that. I think that you can kind of qualify that no longer can be something I can consider good per se, but at the same time, I don't think you could say objectively good. Every film I think I've seen, I've heard somebody have to say a little something negative about it. And certainly you can say that there are levels of good with this type of stuff too.
I think that you could say something is objectively homophobic or xenophobic or racist or whatever, but that in itself does not necessarily determine the quality of the art.
That makes sense. That absolutely makes sense. Speaking of not that per se, but life as a critic in the pandemic world. I know that both of you guys are just starting to go back into theaters now, but with that shutdown, with everything that was happening, Christy, I'll ask you first and Alonso to follow up, just how different that experience has been post-pandemic.
It was strange, and it was strange not driving to LA 3 nights a week to go see my friends at a movie theater. And it was interesting to see how the different studios reacted, because some were in a position to very quickly have a screener app that you could go to on Roku, and like they didn't necessarily want to show you their big releases, on your TV at home, but that was the answer.
Right.
So the uncertainty of it was really strange. And what we tried to do, and this is the origin of what is now our news segment on Breakfast All Day, was just sort of keep people apprised of, okay, this film festival is now going virtual, or this release date got pushed, things like Top Gun Maverick or the most recent Mission Impossible movie. Tom Cruise is so insistent on the theatrical experience, and he has the clout that he can, insist upon it and force it and push things 2 summers down the road. So
Right.
I think just learning to be flexible is interesting. I miss my darling Alonso. We used to do this show in person, all of us, 3 of us, 4 of us around a dining room table. And now we're doing it by Zoom because it's just easier. I live about an hour away from Alonso. So just to expedite production and all that, we do it remotely. But when we see each other, like we saw each other last week at Marcel the Shell with Shoes On. I think we're seeing each other tomorrow night at Elvis, I believe. And so when we do see each other, we appreciate it, I feel, that much more.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think what a lot of people experience in terms of, I'm not going to the office every day, I'm not seeing the people that I work with and that, that we hang out with and we get lunch. That was kind of what not having screenings was like for film critics, because that's where you see your friends and your colleagues, and those would be the moments that we would hang out and chat beforehand or whatever. And so, yeah, that got completely taken away. And it did become this thing of like, all right, well, now we're watching everything at home. And so we have to sort of try and adjust to like, how do I best mimic the theater experience by trying to like block out the lights and turning off my phone and,
Sure.
really paying attention. I think if there was an upside for all this, a lot of places in the country, I think, that don't normally get access to smaller art house foreign documentary releases at the same time as New York or LA, we're suddenly finding that a lot of these distributors like, okay, we're doing a virtual cinema and you can come to our site and you can pay a rental. We'll even give a kickback to like your local art house theater to help them out during all this time, because that's where we would have opened. So if you had high-speed internet and you lived in North Dakota, where maybe the art house movies didn't come
Right.
or took a long time to get there, you
Right.
are now seeing stuff at the same time. You could buy tickets to the Sundance Film Festival. You could participate in film culture in a way that is normally reserved for people who live in larger areas. So I did kind of enjoy that kind of democratization of the process while it lasted.
But the fact that the theaters are coming back has inspired a series that we are doing on our little show called the Movie House Shout Out, where once a week we shine a light on a really cool local independent theater, tell a little bit of the history, what are they showing that week. They're pretty much all nonprofits, and so they could definitely use the financial support. And so we'll put a link down below. This week we're doing a place in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania called the Colonial Theater, which is where they shot The Blob.
Oh, no kidding.
Have you seen The Blob?
Many years ago, yes.
Right. Young Steve McQueen. 28-year-old Steve McQueen.
The iconic shot of the blob oozing out of a movie theater. That's
right.
The Colonial.
Kidding.
And so they shot it at the Colonial, and then every year they do this festival called Blob Fest, where they show the blob and everyone goes running out of the theater to reenact the end of the movie. And so every theater is so fun. So every theater's got some cool story, and they're all kind of needing help getting back on their feet. Like we have found here in LA, a couple of really important art house theaters have closed in the past year or two, and the ArcLight and the Landmark. And so we feel like if those can't stay afloat, how hard is it for local small town theaters? So we're trying to help with that. But that is one thing that, because of the pandemic, I think people are realizing the importance of going back and supporting their local establishments, which are frequently like mainstays in the community for 100 years.
I mean, I miss the theater experience so much. The first movie I went back to actually was In the Heights, and I was so glad that was the first movie that I got a chance to go back to, because that is something that you have to see on the widescreen. I'm glad you mentioned that local theater thing. I went to the Grand Cinema, which was one that you guys profiled not too long ago, and I watched Petite Maman, which if it if it would have come out this year, something we're going to talk about a little bit later, would have been my favorite movie so far of 2022. I guess it technically counts for 2021, but it is so good.
Did you sob?
Oh,
Did you
I
sob
bawled.
the whole
I
time?
just absolutely bawled. I mean,
Same.
I'll cry at pretty much anything. I'll cry at Verizon cell phone commercials. So something that's actually quality is going to definitely make me burst into tears. We're going to talk about baseball movies, but real quick, weekends are better with MLB Sunday Leadoff. Coverage presented by Uber Eats. Catch the Mets take on the Marlins in Miami on Sunday, June 26th at 11:30 a.m. Eastern, live on NBC and Peacock. To learn more, go to peacocktv.com/MLB. And if you want a chance to win $25,000 on the game, download the NBC Sports Predictor app powered by PointsBet and enter Sunday's free Grand Slam Pick'em contest. So before we get into the baseball movies, I wanted to ask you about sports movies in general, because there are a lot of very good sports movies and there are a lot of others. And for every Rocky or Bull Durham, there are a bunch of movies like Summer Catch or The Monkey Movie with Matt LeBlanc, which is
I believe you mean Ed.
I do mean Ed. But I think I probably would have done better if they just called it The Monkey Movie
with Matt LeBlanc.
Matt LeBlanc. Do you guys? I have Alonso. You start, and then Christy follow up if you don't mind. Do you think sports movies are kind of a genre that is set up to fail?
Oh, no, to the contrary. And again, when we talked about Hustle recently, I kind of went on at length about this. I do not like or care about sports or have any interest in sports. And I love sports movies because it's all the good stuff, in a nice tight 90 to 120 minutes. And I think that sports movies allow an opportunity for, they can be personal triumph, personal growth stories. They can be about community. They can be about, a ragtag band of underdogs, whatever. There's a lot of different ways that you can do it. And I think that if you know what you're doing in terms of editing and how you shoot this stuff, you can make the big game or the whatever really suspenseful, really fascinating. And it can also, in the same way that they say about, that a musical number in a musical will give you 10 pages worth of character or plot, depending on how it's incorporated. You can really reveal a lot about character by the way people participate in sports, and how is the guy going to try and go for the 3-pointer every time, or is he going to pass it to a teammate? That kind of thing that counts as personal growth.
Sure.
So no, I think as a genre it has great potential. You can muck it up, and certainly many have.
Right.
But no, I think it's one that always has a lot of promise to it.
I agree with you, my friend, because there is a familiarity in the formula, and there is some aspirational quality to these kinds of movies, because very, very few of us are ever going to have that kind of prowess athletically or in any field, right? Whether it's like being a dog walker or working at a grocery store, whatever your pursuit is, like, you're probably not going to be as good as whoever the sports movie is about. And so to be able to project your own dreams of greatness on just to somebody else is a really fun escape for a little while. Alonso mentioned Hustle recently, and we loved that because it is pure formula, but the way that they get into it is so inspired in terms of the character development, the performances, just the way that the montages are shot. There's always going to be at least one training montage, if not multiple. It's a mainstay of the genre. But the way that these basketball training montages were shot and edited was so thrilling and it encompassed so much that it felt new, which would seem like a hard thing to achieve with a sports movie. And then, like the ones that we're going to talk about later on, quite often the sports movies that I like best have the elements that are the most compelling are not actually the sports parts.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm a huge sports fan. Like, I grew up in LA going to Lakers games, Dodgers games. My dad and I watched sports my whole life. I was a little girl. My husband's a big sports fan. We went to Game 3 of the 2007 World Series when the Red Sox played the Rockies for our 10-year wedding anniversary.
Oh, that's amazing.
My husband's from New Hampshire, so he's a big Red Sox fan. So So yeah, so it's a big part of my life. So I always enjoy, girl-splaining sports too. Alonso. It's always fun.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up Hustle because that was I loved it, and it is another example. Um, we were talking about Pixels, how frustrated I can be that when Adam Sandler is not trying to get a vacation, his movies can be pretty darn good. I mean, and I am enjoying the renaissance. I'm very curious to see that next one as well. By the way, I just forgot the title. It's Spaceman or something like that, but a terrific cast. I believe Carey Mulligan's in the movie as well, which is pretty interesting. But that kind of brings me to my favorite baseball movie, and we'll get into it, and I'll have everybody pick. I'm going to be selfish and pick mine first. My favorite baseball movie is Everybody Wants Some, and it is a recent movie, but it is a movie that I very much enjoy. I am a Richard Linklater stan, and I just think the characters in this movie are so good. Like, this movie kind of made Glenn Powell the to use a baseball term, the prospect coming up, and I'm super excited. I've enjoyed everything I've seen from him. I thought he was, I don't think he got talked enough about how the job he did in Top Gun Maverick. I think that he is going to be someone to watch for a long time. But the characters are so believable in this movie. And what I really like about Everybody Wants Some is everybody in this movie has a moment of being the hero and the a-hole. And I think that's the most relatable thing for me about somebody who grew up playing on sports teams his entire life, was that there are those moments where you have this moment where you love your teammate and you also want to push him off a cliff. There are going to be, and I think that's not just true about baseball. I think that's true about just everybody who grows up with a group of friends or gets to know these guys. I think it does such a good job, and I believe it's like a 72-hour period of the movie of like encapsulating what it is. And I also think, even not having grown up in that area, like, I felt like I was in that town. I felt like I was at the University of Texas for that movie. I thought it was terrific. I think I remember reading watching the review of you guys and enjoying it as well, but I'd love your thoughts on that one.
I would argue that Everybody Wants Some is not even really a baseball movie.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating that you chose it, because when I look back on it, I don't even think of baseball. I think of it as a Richard Linklater hangout movie.
Right.
Very much in the vein of Slacker, or, his shaggier, looser, funner movie. So I totally forgot until just now that there is baseball involved in it.
Yeah.
So then Chris, what do you think of Linklater's Bad News Bears remake then?
Not so much. And that has got to be, to be honest with you, one of the more disappointing films. I think that and you know what, there was kind of a lull, like, as big of a fan as I am of him, there was kind of a moment where I was like, I'm no longer super excited. And then Boyhood came out, and that's my favorite movie of all time, just so everybody is aware. That is, but yeah, I think Bad News Bears was a rare misstep.
Okay.
Yeah, Linklater's one of those filmmakers who's so prolific that every so often you're going to get a Fast Food Nation or something like, okay, better luck next time. No, I'm kind of with Christy. I frankly forgot there was baseball and Everybody Wants Some. I think of it more as being kind of like a camaraderie movie.
Sure.
But yes, they are all teammates, and you're right. That does the fact of having to do these games together does kind of affect their relationships and affect how they think about each other. So in terms of the group dynamic, then yeah, I'd say this is definitely a sports movie that delves into, just the whole sort of notion of what a team even is,
right,
and how they function together.
All right, Christy, your favorite baseball movie?
I have two, and they're very different.
Okay.
One of them is the Bad News Bears, the original Bad News Bears.
Great.
Because it's such a fantastic time capsule. It is actually about baseball, and the way that the team comes together totally informs who these people are and how they evolve, both individually and as a group. It's just a total blast. It's a total 70s time capsule, which is exactly why Richard Linklater could not remake it today
right,
and have like Tanner cursing and have Kelly Leak smoking. Like, you couldn't have that kind of alcoholism and neglect on display in a feel-good family sports movie,
Right.
which is why the original is so rad, because I think movies back then gave people more credit for being able to handle tougher material and more challenging characters. And so I just have really fond memories of that from my own childhood. And clearly I am not scarred. I turned out fine, right?
Yeah,
so there's that. And then my other one is at the totally opposite end of the spectrum, and that is Eight Men Out.
Oh, okay.
Which is, again, a movie that I admire, not even so much as a baseball movie, but for its elegance.
It's a labor movie.
Yeah, but there's like an elegance and an intellectualism to it, and a restraint that like makes the steady pacing so gripping. And it's a fantastic cast, and it's just beautifully shot and acted. And so I don't think people even think of it as a baseball movie, but it is, of course, about the Black Sox scandal. And so so it could not be on the other end of the spectrum further from Bad News Bears, but I like both of them for their extremes.
I think that's a great example of how you can get sports movies right and not have to be the formulaic paint by numbers movies too. You know what I mean? Like Eight Men Out really is a historical piece. Like it's if it's the closest thing, I almost said Downton Abbey, but that's not fair. But it is like it is more of a piece of that time, and they got the costumes so great. That's a good one. I think that one often gets people forget that was a critically acclaimed movie too. Like that movie did really well. It just didn't happen to have the same type of hold that movies like Bull Durham and a few others did. But yeah, I love both of those movies. Alonso, your favorite baseball movie?
I'm gonna go with the Kevin Costner double bill. One of them being Bull Durham, the other being also about Shoeless Joe Jackson, Field of Dreams.
Nice.
I think that Bull Durham is this just sort of wonderfully absurdist film that happens to be set in the world of baseball, but that it gives these odd characters this function and this focus and this these goals for themselves that may or may not have anything to do with what a rational person would do with their lives necessarily. But I like the way that it weaves so much stuff into just like, this very eccentric team, the impact that this minor league team has on this small town and the people who live there and their relationships with the team in general, the commentators, just all of that stuff I think is great. And then like Field of Dreams, I think is maybe the quintessential male weepy, which I don't think we get nearly enough of. Movies where dudes have to pretend they're not crying in the last 10 minutes, but they are crying.
Oh my gosh,
and that one's almost sort of like baseball as a metaphor for something else entirely. It really does kind of come down to like, having a game of catch with your dad, which admittedly, if my dad had ever tried to drag me out for one of those, I'd have been like, my show's on. But the idea of what that represents, I think, has real emotional impact to it.
And we've been thinking about Field of Dreams lately with the passing of Ray Liotta, which made people again point out, oh, but he's batting on the wrong side. Does this bother you, Chris? As a baseball guy, does this bother you?
It doesn't bother me. So Moneyball is another movie that is very critically acclaimed. There are things in that movie that really bug me because it kind of ignores the fact that the Oakland Athletics had some of the very best players in baseball. It tells you this story as if it's like the ragtag group of guys that nobody wanted. Well, no, they had Cy Young Award winners and MVP candidates on that baseball team. But that doesn't tell as good of a story. But I can ignore it a little bit because Brad Pitt and Jonah Hill are so flippin' good in the movie that it just ends up not mattering. As if you have no idea what's going on. I'll ask you that. That's a great question for like not just baseball movies, but for historical movies. How important do you think historical accuracy is for a film?
I mean, if you are pretending like you are giving the real deal here and you're not sort of like playing around with anachronism or, sort of bringing it as sort of a metaphorical idea of what World War I would represent or something, if you're actually trying to be like, this is the story of this particular battle or this particular historical incident, then yeah, I think you better have your stuff ready because it's, you know, if you know what the real thing is and you see them not doing it, that takes you right out of it.
Right.
And there's also that danger, I think, that so many people take the movie version as the history, you know.
Right.
And so when you're Oliver Stone, you better have some footnotes ready if somebody decides to question, like, what? Really?
Yes. Yeah.
You know.
We've been talking about this recently with Winning Time on HBO and how angry Jerry West has been with his portrayal and how he has threatened to take it, quote, all the way to the Supreme Court. And good luck with that, Jerry West.
That's a look, bud.
But it's interesting when you have a story that is like deeply steeped in very specific people and places and games, like then why deviate so vastly in terms of characterization? Like there's so much inherent drama to the Showtime Lakers. Like why mess with that?
Right.
You know, and to see have people like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar write so beautifully and persuasively about how wrong this show gets everything, and he was there. You know, it's fascinating, and I wonder like why do that? And then of course they have their little disclaimer.
yeah, little disclaimer. Before we get into the bad ones, the other one I wanted to bring up real quick was I'm not sure if you guys saw the movie Sugar. This
Sugar's
was
great.
directed by Anna Bolden and Ryan Fleck. If I was going to recommend one baseball movie for anyone to watch, I think it would be this one, just because it's pretty poignant right now, especially. I mean, it's always going to be a movie that has a connection to what's going on with the world. But like this was directed by the people who did Half Nelson, which is another really good film.
And Captain Marvel.
And Captain Marvel, that's correct. Yeah, that's a interesting filmography of a way to take on a bunch.
We call that range, kid.
But for those unfamiliar, it's a story of a young player from the Dominican who goes to New York and really goes through this stuff. And I got to tell you, as somebody who does cover this stuff, it's a very realistic tale of how difficult it can be to make this adjustment. These kids are signed at 16 years old, brought into the United States. Just recently did Major League Baseball start providing even housing for these guys. A lot of these guys before that had to go find a somewhere to live, on their own. They would have to get painting jobs because they do not get paid a lot of money. They get their signing bonus, but most guys are not getting 6 or 7 figures. They're getting a very small stipend and then are going to have to spend 6 to 7 years in the minor leagues before they reach the major leagues. It's not like the NFL where you're getting drafted and you're just automatically going to play.
Here's your shoe deal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Unfortunately, there's a reason you don't see too many cleats on the Times Square thing as well. That is just not how that is going to.
No, my brother for a while was an orthopedic surgeon working with the Braves, and he told me about like how many players there were that had come up from the DR, and I was like, oh, you need to see this movie because it really goes into that. And that's absolutely, I think, a corner of this that no one has ever really talked about. And so that movie, obviously for me it was eye-opening because I don't know anything, but I think even for people who are pretty steeped in this world was kind of a surprise.
Yeah. I really enjoyed it. Pelotero is a documentary that explores this as well. That was narrated by John Leguizamo. Definitely check those out. There's a lot of good stuff. But that's not fun to talk about. Let's talk about the crap. I'll have you start this time, Alonso. Your all-time least favorite baseball movie and why?
Yeah, I mean, you really hit it on the. I mean, Ed is an embarrassment in general, and I mean, and it's the kind of thing where like it's so. I don't think it's not easy to do anything right, but there are so many good baseball movies and so many kinds of fun baseball movies. Like I love Rookie of the Year, like there's a lot of movies out there that find the drama or the comedy or the whatever. And this movie is just a series of terrible decisions.
Yeah, it's really bad. I happened to catch it on, I think, Showtime at like 1:30 in the morning. And I think that was a higher power telling me to go to bed. It's just really to be watching.
What are you even doing right now?
That is exactly. I definitely at one point said, "What are you doing with your life right now?" But it's terrible. It is every possible awful cliche that you could have in a comedy. It is a Terrible performance by Matt LeBlanc. I hope he got the bag for that movie, man. Like, because I mean, I don't know if you guys watched the show Episodes.
Yes.
I was like, while I was watching that show, I was like, when they're talking about some of their projects, I was like, you're talking about Ed right now, aren't you? Christy, your least favorite baseball movie?
Mine is Trouble with the Curve.
Oh,
See that, kid? That's Trouble with the Curve, which is a great example of like wedging in the title of the movie, in the dialogue. We always clap. We're always like, yay, you did it. So this is a favor that Clint Eastwood clearly did for a longtime producer of his, Robert Lorenz. And this is Robert Lorenz. He directed it. And it stars Clint Eastwood as this aging scout, and Amy Adams is his estranged daughter, and somehow Justin Timberlake gets in the mix. And it just feels totally inauthentic in every step of the way. I mean, I am not the baseball expert that you are, but it didn't feel like the scouting, like he should know things like this character did not know, like he's not that out of it that he needs to be like spoon-fed. Maybe that's just exposition, but it felt very clunky and very inauthentic. And also just like none of the emotional connections resonated as far as like the father-daughter stuff. And it just feels cheesy and cloying and sentimental and forced and false.
Coincidentally, also not good is The Scout with Albert Brooks and Brendan Fraser.
Oh my gosh. You know what? That movie actually has one of my most unrealistic things, other than the fact that everything about that movie is completely unrealistic. But at the end of the game, there's a perfect game, and they talk about this guy, Ozzie Smith, who is a Hall of Fame baseball player, is going to be a chance to break up this thing. Why is the Hall of Fame player batting ninth? That is last in the batting order. That doesn't make any sense to be like building this drama to be facing the Cardinals' worst hitter in the game. That is a movie that I really enjoyed as a kid, by the way, The Scout, and it made me realize that children are just kind of stupid. But Trouble with the Curve was actually a tie for me with the movie that I was going to pick because it's terrible. It's also got this anti-analytic message that anybody who looks at stats or stuff like that, the Matthew Lillard character is just like every front office member for every baseball team and like the heart and soul of the team. And like the player that they draft is like, they determine he's going to be a bust off of like a practice session, which is definitely a good way to spend millions of dollars and determine that you don't want this player in your organization. So my least favorite baseball movie is going to get me yelled at, and it's happened before. I hate The Sandlot. And I know that a lot of people really like The Sandlot. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that kids, nostalgia, we just assume that this was good. I challenge you as a person who's grown up to watch The Sandlot now and tell me that it's a good movie. It relies into, oh no, go ahead.
As I always say, was it great or were you 8?
It's our new game show.
I would definitely put that on the Patreon. Absolutely. I would absolutely love to do that. It is entirely reliant on nostalgia. It is basically like almost like the Family Guy baseball movie where you're just pointing out, hey, do you remember this? Hey, do you remember how that did? I know you guys are not a fan of this as well. Every single music drop on it is so on the flipping nose. This magic moment starts playing when Smalls gets kissed by Wendy Peppercorn. I mean, the most obvious of obvious. By the way, that movie is directed by the guy who wrote Matt LeBlanc with the Monkey movie. And I don't think that is entirely. So this is a very volatile movie, I'll tell you guys. So I would love your guys' thoughts on The Sandlot, because this is a lot of people on baseball Twitter, if that's actually a thing, favorite baseball movie, and then there are some people like me who know what they're talking about.
I've never seen it.
Yeah, I mean, I have, but it was a long time. We're a little older than you, Chris. And so
that's true.
It's not our childhood.
No, that's
I have
fair.
seen it, but it's been a while. So I don't have any strong feelings. And so when you wrote to us and said that there's controversy about The Sandlot, I'm like, why?
Yeah. It's just, I think a lot of people love that nostalgic factor. Like
I do say you're killing me, Smalls, but I never saw the movie.
Hey, that's fair. That's a lasting thing that film can take with it. It's interesting because when I wrote you guys that email, Field of Dreams is another one that is controversial, I would say, as well. I think it's because of some issues with how schmaltzy it is and stuff like that. But I think Field of Dreams to me is a perfect example of how you can get schmaltz right. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like if you like Phil Alden Robinson, when he got that stuff right, he got it right. Like this was, and James Earl Jones is terrific in the movie, and
Lancaster, come
for,
on.
yeah, it's for me that doesn't matter. Formula. I want to ask you guys this as well. I think that's when I read reviews and I just see the word formulaic sometimes. Can you kind of explain what formulaic means in a negative term? Like when you see that in reviews, when somebody says something is formulaic, what are they really trying to say?
Good. Right, I'll go. So I just think it's like when a movie goes through the motions and it hits all the notes that you expect without any kind of ingenuity or inspiration.
Okay.
Yeah, basically. In other words, like there are very few times you're ever going to like completely, reinvent the wheel on any kind of film genre. But
Right.
you can tell the difference between a movie that either loves its tropes or is playing with the tropes or giving a little twist, or at least giving you so much other stuff that is pleasurable that you don't mind that you're going through the steps on the tropes. But then, yeah, otherwise, if you're just phoning it in and doing the thing that we know you're going to do and in the exact same way that 20 other people have done it, then that's formulaic.
Yeah, I kind of seems to me it's the paint by numbers. You're not going to be surprised by what's going on. If you nail it, that's great. But it also can be, I think, especially for film critics who see so many of these. You guys have to watch so many movies. I can see how that could be frustrating. And speaking of so many movies, I know it's June 21st, but I have to ask you, and I'll have Christy, you go first, and Alonso second. Your favorite movie so far this year?
We might have the same movie.
I honestly think all three of us might have the same movie.
It might be RRR.
Yeah. Yeah. Please tell everyone about the spectacle of wonder that is RRR.
I don't want to ruin it. I want our viewers and listeners to experience it. I will say this: it's on Netflix.
Yes,
it's an Indian film in Telugu, but it's on Netflix in a Hindi dub, which I know a lot of folks feel is inferior. And also, if you can see it in the theater like Alonso did, that's great. I hear that it's being re-released some places in the United States, but it is this wild, like over-the-top fan fiction. The idea of these two Indian revolutionaries from kind of different times meeting up and becoming buddies and having this like thrilling bromance, but they also have like a giant dance battle, which has become this viral sensation online. It is 3 hours long. You never know what's going to happen. It is every kind of movie rolled into one, all done like with wild exuberance and the stuff with the animals. Anyway, Alonso, please can help me.
No, it is just breathtaking. It is this pure cinematic experience where you just have your jaw on the floor and you're short of breath, and it's all of that stuff. And obviously, as Western audiences, I think we're probably missing a lot of the political undercurrents. And I've been reading a lot of critics in India who've been saying, like, yes, the film was a lot of fun, but it's also kind of about these kind of not great political, subtext, blah blah blah. And sadly, I'm behind the curve and don't fully know that. But going in as somebody who doesn't know any of the backstory and just sort of experience it as this movie that I knew nothing about, it was one of the most thrilling film watching experiences of my life.
So when I saw your guys' review, I went to Netflix and saw that it was on there, and I saw that it was 3 hours long, and I was planning. I was like, all right, I'm going to watch the first half, and then I'll watch the second half in the morning, because it was on, it was like 8:30 at night when I saw the review, and I was like, all right, 9 o'clock. I watched it twice. I was so smitten with this movie. It is so good, and I'm glad you guys don't spoil. Like, there are some scenes in this movie that, like, Michael Bay should be ashamed of himself, because, like,
for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, for a lot of reasons. Although I will say, Ambulance on Peacock, not too bad.
It's fun.
But RRR was just like the type of movie that can make you fall in love with movies. You know what I mean? Like the type of thing. And I will be, if it comes out anywhere from here to Seattle, I am definitely going to be looking for it on as big of screen as possible. I will mention too, I just watched Good Luck to You, Leo Grand, which I'm not sure if you guys
Reviewed
really
it,
enjoyed
yeah.
that. Emma Thompson is so good in this movie,
So
and I
good.
already forgot the name of the lead.
Daryl
male.
McCormick.
Boy, he's fantastic,
He's a
and
star.
that is.
No,
go
sorry.
ahead.
Isaiah, if you're a Linklater fan, don't miss Apollo 10.5 on Netflix,
Oh,
his new
yes.
animated feature, which is also one of my favorites for this year.
I am definitely trying to square up some time to watch that as well. Alonso and Christy, this was so much fun.
So
Thank you
fun.
guys so much for having us. Thank you so much for coming on to the show. Please promote all of the stuff that you guys are doing, because all of it is great.
So we have a YouTube channel. We are Breakfast All Day. If you go look for us on YouTube, we are there. We are also in podcast form and all the places where you can find podcasts. We have a Patreon. It is Be Fast All Day. What are we? Patreon.com/Be Fast All Day. We are on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Be Fast All Day. We talk about movies, new movies, old movies. We're talking about The Blob today. We do news. We do Ask Us Anything segments, and we've been around for a while in various forms, but you can find us here in this form.
And over on Patreon, you also get our TV recap.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for all the latest fantasy and sports betting advice from NBC Sports Edge. And don't forget to sign up for NBC Sports Edge Plus to get the best-in-class draft guides, as well as season-long fantasy, DFS, and sports betting tools that will give you the edge.